Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hope the beer was good. I think it was Fremont Brewery across the street. So it'll make the panel even more interesting than we had already planned on it to be. So thank you for joining us. I'm State Senator Joe Nguyen out of the 34th District. So that's basically downtown, West Seattle, SoDo. So I have the Port of Seattle in my area. And I happen to also chair our Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee, where we've done a tremendous amount of work in the sustainable aviation field, but also just sustainability in general as well. And very excited for this panel today, and wanted to bring up the guests that we have. Jordan Haverly, who is the Federal Public Affairs Manager for Neste, welcome. And then also, yeah, please do. And then Stephanie Meyn, who is the Climate Program Manager at SeaTac Airport, which is part of the Port of Seattle. And then fun fact, she's also an atmospheric scientist, so I feel like that's a pretty good background to have when it comes to this work. Well, thank you so much for joining us. First off, really want to just open up and kind of tee up the conversation around, tell us a little bit about your background and your roles and how that really relates to SAF in Washington State, or just SAF in general.
Yeah, so I joined Neste about 3 years ago to lead our federal advocacy for renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel. I'm actually based in the other Washington, D.C., but happy to be out here in Washington and talk a little bit about how all of those programs at the federal and state level have to work together to make SAF a reality.
Yeah, and then Jordan's background, he was on the Hill as a staffer for a long time, so I'm going to probably bring up a joke about how it's going to have to be state ran, because I'm not sure how much we're going to get done at the federal level. And then Stephanie, for you.
So I have been with the Port of Seattle, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport for 10 years as their climate program manager, and it is my responsibility in that role to figure out how we meet the airport and the port's net zero carbon by 2040 goal for our own operations that we own and control, and then our carbon neutral goals for 2050 for the rest of the airport, that is all of the airlines, the ground transportation providers, and the other tenants that operate at our airport.
Yeah.
And as part of my portfolio as well, within that category, I lead the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Strategic Plan work that we do at SeaTac Airport.
Wonderful. We're going to dive into questions, but as we go along, there will be a Q&A section at the very end. So feel free to start thinking about what you might want to ask as well, because we'd love to get your feedback. And the first one we'll just dive into, obviously, as a legislator, policy and initiatives are kind of how we drive change, at least at that level. Washington State has been a pioneer on a number of pieces of policy, low carbon fuel standards, SB 5447 as it relates to SAF. Can you discuss whether state or federal policies or initiative has really helped encourage the adoption of SAF, and how have these influenced kind of how you do business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first program you had for biofuels, finally amended to include SAF, is the renewable fuel standard at the federal level. That's kind of your base for this industry. And then came the state low carbon fuel standards, and those really pushed biofuels to focus on their carbon intensity and really reduce that. And then you have the last leg of the stool, the tax credit side. Credits at the federal level, and in Washington is you kind of have 4 legs of the stool here.
Yeah.
And all of those, stacking those incentives on top of one another is what allows first renewable diesel and now SAF to really find a place in the marketplace that's affordable.
Yeah. What do you think, Stephanie?
These policies have been really critical to drive the initial growth. I think the low carbon fuel standard in California showed us that really without that, I don't think we would have had the adoption of renewable diesel or sustainable aviation fuel and the growth that we had initially in this country. And then I think the layers of policy that we've been really stacking in the state level are also things that you can stack the federal credits on top of. So this approach of stacking lots of different credits together allows us to get the price down to something that's closer to the price of jet fuel. And I think what's interesting about SB 5447 here in the state is that it's very focused on production in the state. And I think a lot of the policies that we've adopted are about getting that sort of final price down for the end user, and how that incentive is shared along the supply chain from the producer to the blender to the airline that uses it can really vary. But what I think is really unique and interesting about the state bill here is that it's really got production, a minimum production level tied to it that really incentivizes that doesn't kick in until there is a certain production level in the state. And I think that's a really exciting piece of legislation.
Yes, so I think it's 25 million is what we ended up doing.
Yeah.
And then for folks who were probably here yesterday with the governor, he probably brought up the Climate Commitment Act. A lot of this was made possible with funding through that program as well. And then even through that, we've had, I think, 2 companies now locate in Washington State, or at the very least expand their productions because of it too. So it's good to see sometimes that government policies can work and actually drive innovation as well. And then for you, Stephanie, SeaTac obviously is critical to the aviation landscape in Washington State. It's our largest airport, one of the fastest growing in the world. So what is SeaTac and the Port of Seattle doing specifically as it relates to SAF?
Well, one thing that's, I guess, challenging and somewhat unique, at least in the US, is that airports, I mean, we don't buy any fuel ourselves. We don't actually have a direct role in fuel at all. So it's really, initially when we began the journey of what is the role for an airport in the US in sustainable aviation fuel, we mostly said, well, we support it and we applauded any time there was money or research towards it. But what we really started focusing on about 10 years ago was really shifting our view to what can we do to support economic development. And we, as the Port of Seattle, who own SeaTac Airport, what could we do to really influence economic development? So we started with sort of a landscape view of what do we need to do to get this here? And it began with an infrastructure study, and we were the first airport to do that in the world in 2016. And really looked at all of the things that you needed to have to get the sustainable aviation fuel to the airport. And from there, it really then turned to, well, what else could we do around the feedstocks that are actually local to this region that could be used for sustainable aviation fuel? And so we partnered with Washington State University to do the research on how much of the feedstock from waste cooking oils, municipal solid waste, wood waste in our greater region could be used to supply sustainable aviation fuel to our airport. And with that really came the momentum from our leadership to pass a sustainable aviation fuel goal. And that was basically by 2028, there's different layers to the goal, but the first goal is by 2028 to have 10% sustainable aviation fuel at our airport. And so that really sort of set the momentum in place. And I'd say lastly, the thing that we've been doing, so besides sort of these research pieces to kind of feed into the really the greater knowledge, so that a producer who's coming into the region can just pick up one of our reports and understand, okay, this is what's available to me for the supply chain that the airport has studied. But we've also really spent a lot of time focusing on the policy piece. And really spending a lot of time in Olympia to try and help support the passing of the Clean Fuel Standard and 5447.
And we kind of brought this up before we jumped onto the stage. We had talked about, obviously, there's going to be advancements in the technology. We're still doing a lot of research as well. But some of the core infrastructure that we need to promote sustainable aviation fuels and decarbonize our transportation sector is actually available now, right? And the hard part is, like you're saying, is how do we site these blending facilities? How do we get that pipeline down to the airports? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in our particular case in Seattle, we are in a unique corner of the country, really. That I mean, one of the things that has happened with California passing their low carbon fuel standard first is that there was more emphasis on developing the supply chain there. There are also more sort of there's more infrastructure, more blending facilities, more refinery facilities that they could utilize to blend the sustainable aviation fuel before getting it to the sort of the standard, the safety standard, to then put into the regular supply chain. And here we have a very constrained supply pipeline for the actual jet fuel to our airport. And we also don't have a lot of industrial tank farm areas available where you could do that blending. And so there have been studies across, just looking nationally at the US to see how within the infrastructure, which of the airports are on constrained pipelines and have these challenges. And I know in talking to some of my European airports, we collaborate a lot actually with Nordic and Northern European airports on a lot of initiatives because of a lot of the shared jet fuel infrastructure moving across countries. They have also been examining this challenge.
Wonderful, and hopefully as we figure it out, we can share that as well.
Yeah.
And then for you, Jordan, obviously when it comes to anything sustainable or even with these fuels, I think partnerships are crucial in terms of scaling. You can't do it by yourself. Neste has done a tremendous amount of work, not just with the ports, but otherwise as well. Talk about some of the partnerships that you've had as a company and how that's inspired some of this growth.
Yeah, absolutely. We've partnered with two companies that you've probably heard of here: Boeing, Alaska Airlines. Are some of our big partners here in Washington. But we're supplying SAF to most of the major airlines in the U.S., multiple continents, and having the commitment from those airlines to purchase the fuel gives you that certainty that you can make those investments, scale up production at existing facilities.
Are you seeing, so what's driving some of their commitment associated with this work? Is it around decarbonization? Is it around economics? Or do they see this as the future? Or I'm kind of curious to see, how do we encourage more folks to jump on board as well?
Yeah, they certainly want to meet their climate goals that they've set for themselves. Very little in the U.S. has a mandate approach to making airlines use it as they have in Europe. So the value of the incentives and the programs that I work on every day to expand, those are what really make it possible for them to meet their commitments through purchasing SAF.
Yeah, so the carrot and a stick model, I guess, is what we have as well.
Could I throw a little addition to that? One of the other sort of interesting drivers in that landscape is actually corporations. And I know we have a lot of really innovative corporations headquartered here who you've heard from. And a lot of them are actually driving that interest in saying, we really want sustainable aviation fuel in the planes that we're flying for our business aviation, even in the commercial jets. And so there's a lot and in fact, because many of those corporations are based here, the demand for having that fuel here at this airport so that can support their objectives is also part of that driver, and an interesting partnership that I don't think when we initially started in this space that we thought about.
Yeah, it's twofold, right? It's the idea that we need to decarbonize, obviously, to mitigate the impacts of climate change, but also the economic driver associated with this. So we'll do one more question with me, and I'll be happy to open it up to the panel as well. I'll see we have one already set. Actually, we'll just go to questions from the audience. There was very eager hands going up. We'll go with you in the front, and then I'll go to you next. Is there a microphone that we have for?
Yeah, I don't think they were prepared for us right
Awesome, thank you. No, the hands went up so fast. I just wanted to get them going. Hello.
Hello. My name is Jari Christensen. I don't fly that much, but I read the news, and it's like if you take a flight to Europe, it didn't matter that you drove a Prius for the whole year because you just blew your budget anyway. So I have a question to Stephanie. Does Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, do they differentiate the price whether you land with an airplane that has fuel efficient sustainable aviation fuel, or if you don't have? Because they pay a lot to land on your property.
Correct. There are federal regulations that dictate how airports anywhere in the U.S. Can differentiate pricing, and there is a very strict rules about how we can do that. We have explored the possibility of trying something like that. Admittedly, demonstrating that flight took off with sustainable aviation fuel in it is a bit challenging depending on the airports. So we have looked at it, but there are so many layers that are really impacting from a regulatory standpoint, from our airport regulator and what we're allowed to do contractually, that make that challenging. But I mean, we've looked at it and we think it's compelling and interesting. I'll say it that way.
TBD. Yeah, we'll have another right up front, and then I'll go to you in the back next.
Hi, I'm Justin Carlson, a PhD. I'm the president and CEO of Soldiers to Civilians. We bridge the gap between employers and U.S. veterans. And Shane Carroll, our director of operations for Washington, is here. So if you're interested in getting veterans jobs, employment, plane veterans, You can talk to him or me.
Thank you.
But specifically for jet fuel, I'm wondering what's the biggest gap that perhaps a small business or an innovative company could fill? Is it the blending side of things? Is it the production side of things? Is it the infrastructure? And you have a large company like Nestle, which is the dominant player. Hats off to you, wonderful company, I applaud you. What are you guys doing to encourage smaller players to come in and perhaps, be the sinew or fill in the gaps and then perhaps grow to be a competitor for Nestle?
That's a great question. I think what's interesting about sustainable aviation fuel, it is not a monolith. You can make sustainable aviation fuel from raw agricultural crops, you can make it from waste cooking oil, you can make it from municipal solid waste. And so because there are so many different ways that you can convert those feedstocks into jet fuel, I think there's a lot of different players, even in the agricultural sector or small businesses, that are already playing in those worlds. So even the biodiesel industry has actually been connected to the used cooking oil and has used that historically. So I think that there's a lot of spaces where, especially because we are looking to our communities around us for those feedstocks, that I think there's a really great opportunity within all of those smaller industries that play into those feedstocks, where I think they could definitely play a role. And then honestly, as you were mentioning, the different, could they play a role in infrastructure? Could they play a role in blending? I mean, the answer is yes. I think that a lot of the solutions here, there is no one size fits all because of how different every airport location is, the supply chain, and what is an economic feedstock in every different area.
Yeah. And one I would add to that, I completely agree with everything you said as well. The future is really in the feedstock side, and I think one that doesn't get mentioned enough, we call them novel vegetable oils, and kind of focusing on crops that you can grow that aren't competing with food, that can be grown with climate-smart ag practices, less fertilizer, no-till, kind of developing how that system works, how you account for it, can greatly expand the availability of low-carbon feedstocks.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. We got someone in the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Britta. I'm from Portland, and I work in the aviation industry. So I'm really interested in what you have to say. I'm hearing a lot about how California started this initiative. I'm hearing about how SeaTac has really taken a goal and run with it. What about us itty-bitty Oregonians with our very small international airport? How do we get on a pathway to take advantage of these sustainable aviation fuels when we are, relatively smaller players in the aviation game? Oh, and that's actually primarily a question about community involvement, like citizens saying, hey, I want this. Also, how do we get Neste's attention? And from the
You got it.
yeah, and from,
right there.
And from SeaTac's perspective, I just wanted to say thank you for letting us know about how you did this infrastructure plan and had these goals. That was super helpful. Yeah.
You want to go first?
Sure.
The reality of SAF right now is there's just not enough to go around. There's far more demand than we have production right now. We're in the next couple of years, we'll double our production. New producers are coming online, and the fuel that we are making and that they're making is going to follow the most valuable incentives first, where you can stack the most incentives, whether it be an LCFS program, clean fuel program, a tax credit. The more of those you can stack, the more fuel is going to flow there, at least until we hit sort of that critical mass of production where it is much more widely available.
And I have, I think, a three-prong answer, which I'll do quickly to your question. The first is that we are actually working on a collaborative. It's the Cascade Collaborative between YVR, Vancouver Airport, Seattle, and Portland, and working specifically on sustainable aviation fuel and the fact that we have a shared pipeline and shared major refineries that serve all three of our airports. So we actually have a collaborative working on that very thing. Secondly, there are actually, it's a Portland Airport is a very strategic location for the Columbia River, the movement of a lot of the flow of fuel, the flow of goods and services that actually, from a strategic location, even for inland production moving in, it actually makes a lot of sense to move it into Portland. So I think you'll find that producers will be attracted to that area for those reasons. And then my third point is that from a community and how to get the community engaged and involved, I will point to the largest carrier at both of our airports. Alaska Airlines has started to talk about Choose, which is a Norwegian-based company that allows passengers to engage with not just purchasing offsets, but purchasing credits, sustainable aviation fuel credits, certificates, that can be used towards, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll get SAF on your plane, but it helps build the industry and helps support SAF where that airline flies, and they have that available. But I think it's an incredibly important tool to engage the customer so that they even understand it's out there and they can start asking for it and saying, yeah, this matters to me as a flyer. I want to see this industry grow.
Thank you. And I think this clock is telling me I'm done. Is that what's going on? And one more? Okay, let's do one more. Yeah. Or here. Let's do, can we do two more? Fred, and then you real quick? Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, never mind. Either or. Whoever has the mic, you win.
Okay. All right. It's an extension of the last question, I think. I love SAF. The question is, and you sort of intimated it just now, is how are we going to produce enough? Because the issue is, at the moment, and this is probably a little historic, that we produce enough aviation fuel for the Lufthansa fleet for about a week. So how fast can we increase our production and also enable SeaTac, for example, to get to its 10% target, which we'd like it to be 100, but that's going to be a long time away. So just how fast can we build this out?
One in particular I want to raise is on the federal tax credit side. The Inflation Reduction Act created a SAF blenders tax credit for 2 years, 23 and 24, and then immediately next year starts to reduce in value for 3 years until it's gone. We need a long-term signal on that side at the value we're having now or higher to keep driving those investments. Most of the credits in IRA were for 10 years. SAF got 5 at only 2 before it decreased in value. So that's a policy that has to change to scale this.
Yeah, maybe I can, a lot of this has to do with it building quickly enough, and I will say to maybe emphasize that point, the state of Washington is also working on clean energy facility siting, and I think getting communities, getting the state comfortable with the idea that, I mean, we've, especially in the US, we've moved away from manufacturing and building new facilities, but if we're building new facilities to support clean energy and the clean energy economy, we need to have permitting and the procedures for that to be rapid enough to keep pace, and I think I know the state of Washington's working on this. I think the federal government, there's much to do to be able to get to the pace that you're describing.
Yeah, I think to your point, it's actually very boring in terms of how do you make this go faster. You cite things faster, you have permitting go faster, and you work with local jurisdictions to make it all happen. Pablo, want to wrap? Yeah.
Just maybe you guys can help me understand how you, in the specific context of aviation fuel, how do you define sustainability? I presume all these fuels are not equal. So for us, how do we understand if we're being sold something that's sustainable aviation fuel, how do we compare that to other things? I mean, what are we looking for? Are there metrics on this? How do we understand what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I was going to say in statute, we do define the carbon intensity associated with it and also the materials that are part of it as well. So if you're getting palm oil from the Amazon, that totally does not count, right? So there's things there's things that we do benchmark in terms of making sure that it's more sustainable, but I just write the policy. I don't actually know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but you got it. Basically there are now worldwide bodies that are making sure that the definition of that and the measurements to ensure that across the entire life cycle, so from the feedstocks that's produced and how they're produced, whether they're waste, whether how much water went into the inputs or how much energy went into the input to transform that into sustainable aviation fuel, everything along the supply chain is being evaluated and scored in order to basically pass the test of sustainability. And if it doesn't, it isn't considered that. And certainly the policies match that you get higher levels of dollars for how much you reduce the carbon intensity of the fuel. And so it's really, it incentivizes the producer to bring that down as low as possible to make the most money from the product.
Yeah. Perfect. Here, Fred, because you're an
Joe,
elected official.
You did say
go
it was
ahead.
only two more, but you did call my name.
Okay.
So anyway, I'm Port of Seattle Commissioner
Fellman.
Fred Fellman. I'm one of 5 elected board members of the Port of Seattle, and we're really fortunate to have Stephanie Meyn as one of our champions, nationally recognized champions in the sustainable aviation field. And I just wanted to point out that the question of production has always been the huge thing, feedstock production. And our legislation, requires that we have a certain level of production locally before the tax credits are put in place. Well, I fully support the concept. The question of siting, we talk about the Seattle way. It takes forever, no matter how many incentives you give. So it seems to me it has to be and that there are big facilities that currently exist. It's easier for them to ramp up than us from starting from scratch. So I'm just wondering a little bit whether we've created somewhat of a disincentive to getting infrastructure, getting fuel to the airport at this point, but while we should be ramping up. Quite frankly, I would love to see us getting the infrastructure physically to get to the airport, because that I-5 pipeline is at capacity. So we have some challenges, although because Stephanie's got that communication with everybody, I'm delighted for that. But we're over allocated, and we got to use some of this IIJA money to increase that capacity. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure there was a question so much as, okay. Thank you, Fred. I agree. We need to go faster. Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate it.